Hello, Melanie. It's good to talk to you today.
Hi, Mike. Great to speak to you too. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Now, going to be chatting about wages and immigration. Talking about you're an immigration expert, and I guess to kick off, does immigration drive wages down or prevent them from going up?
Well, it's a very interesting topic, isn't it?
It
I mean, I
is.
certainly wouldn't say it does either, actually. I
Hmm.
mean, for example, if you look at the priority migration skilled occupation list at the moment, there's occupations on there such as software engineer, construction program manager, and so on and so forth. We've just done an application for one of those occupations, software engineer, and the salary was something like 90,000, 100,000. And when you do these applications, a lot of them are through employer sponsorship
Hmm.
because that's the way the government has kind of programmed the migration for the budget year. There's more focus on that than even points tested skilled migration. And an employer has to show that they are matching the salary with the equivalent of that of an Australian. So, and then of course, in more regional remote areas where it's very hard to attract people into those positions, employers, for example, places like Karratha in Western Australia, or you've got up in far north Queensland or what have you, wages actually have to go up in order to attract people, including migrants, into those positions, like
Yeah,
childcare and so on.
of course. So what does, I mean, look, Melanie, looking back at the last 18 months now, almost 2 years, what impact has that had with the whole immigration and jobs and wages?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've come through the pandemic. Aside from the lockdown that's happening now,
Mm.
unemployment levels have actually they're back to what they were pre-pandemic. So it's certainly showing that Australians are not out of jobs as they, just as it's very similar to what it was before the pandemic. Immigration-wise, though, it's very tricky, and there's increasing talk about skill shortages. For example, you could see examples such as the priority skilled migration occupation list, which just went up to 41 occupations. And what that means is you can actually bring people overseas and they can have travel exemptions automatically to come in, which is quite a sensitive area, of course, when we've
Mm.
just had our international arrival numbers halved since 14th of July last week. But it just shows how in demand those occupations are and how they make the wheels of the economy spin. There's also the other occupations in an industry such as agriculture, where you need the fruit pickers and so on. And in those areas, they're really suffering because obviously they don't have the backpackers who normally work in those and travel
Mm.
around in the more remote rural areas. And places like Darwin have been able to take advantage of pilot programs to bring in workers from Vanuatu and so on. So it's really, I think we're starting to really see the impact. There's international students, of course, not coming in, and the various areas of the economy have been suffering as a result of that, not just
Mm.
accommodation, universities and colleges, but also the other industries that get affected
Yeah.
around that. So there's been a
Yeah.
lot of impacts actually.
Melanie, you mentioned that skills list. There's 41 occupations on that list. Does that sort of rotate? Does that change from year to year, or how does that work?
Well, that only actually started, Mike, in the last few months,
Mm.
and the idea of that was really to counteract some of these skills shortages that are coming about. But there are various gazetted occupation lists, as it were, which means that the government can basically change them and amend them as they like. The regulations don't have to go through Parliament to
Okay.
change them. So, they obviously utilise measurements such as the National Skills Commission, which has just published a report just recently, and some of the occupations on that priority migration skilled occupation list are definitely mentioned in
Mm.
that report. So that has only just started over the pandemic period, and
Okay.
it's really to counteract what's been going on during this
Yeah.
time.
Interesting. Melanie, is it difficult for, I guess, not only state government but federal government keeping up with identifying the training needs and finding out with those, because obviously, you can identify there's a problem today, but then it would take years to get someone trained. Is that a constant challenge that we have here in Australia with the whole training area?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's all interlinked, and it's definitely something government does need to be looking at constantly. And you mentioned state and federal. I mean, the states are responsible, for example, for their own migration skilled occupation list, but of course for the training of Australians that needs to take place. I think, I've mentioned I went to the regional Australian Institute conference a few months ago, where I heard this amazing stat about only six Australians graduating, for example, in petroleum engineering. 65% of engineers come from overseas to Australia. But of course, the reality is we're also only a working population of about 12 million, because you've got to take into account our aging population, as opposed to some economies which have 200 to 300 million working people. So clearly, regardless of the training that needs to take place for Australians, or perhaps, in fact, that's why it makes it even more important to get that training right, there's just going to be skill shortages, no matter what. And of course, a lot of Australians go overseas too.
Yeah, that's true. Can we get better, do you think, in Australia at training our young people once they exit the school system? Is that something that can improve, do you think?
Yes, I definitely think so. I mean, the TAFEs, there's been reports recently about many TAFEs that need to get more up to date with what they're doing. I think there probably needs to be more encouragement of young Australians to go into certain areas that are in demand in Australia. Perhaps there needs to be more knowledge around that, and more campaigns to encourage those young Australians to go into these areas. I know there's a big campaign for families to go into regional areas, but I think that we could do with a lot more campaigns around training young Australians. It's an area that I'm interested in, with my own child growing up. I'm a migrant myself, but I have an Australian child growing up here. I'd like to see that happen, definitely. I think, the main point is that immigration creates jobs, actually. It doesn't, there's always a fear about migrants coming in and taking away jobs. But the fact is, if migrants come in and they help to build up businesses, they bring skill sets with them, that in itself is going to help train and upskill and motivate young Australians too. So we live in a global economy, and, we're part of it.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for having a chat with me this morning. It's been good.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.